At a Trump town hall gathering, an older woman from Texas stood up to pose a simple question about the price of pharmaceuticals. What happened next stunned the audience of 800 into complete silence. Military veterans walked out of the building. Senior citizens removed their MAGA hats. Furthermore, the Fox News production team lost control of the telecast. However, it was actually Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's question about Trump's daughter that fundamentally changed the atmosphere completely. For 30 seconds, the man famous for immediate comebacks stayed entirely silent. By the end of the night, careers were destroyed, private lives were changed, and a viral video viewed 18 million times proved that evidence sometimes possesses more power than any politician. The upcoming account describes those occurrences. The October heat in Fort Worth pressed against the convention center's glass facade like an unrelenting debt collector showing up at a house. Inside the auditorium, industrial air conditioners struggled and vibrated, fighting a losing battle against 800 individuals squeezed into a space designed for just 600. The temporary metal chairs borrowed from the nearby First Baptist Church groaned and protested whenever someone shifted their weight. The scent of hairspray mixed with men's cologne, both attempting to mask another distinct odor. It was the sharp chemical smell of medicine bottles being opened and quickly closed as pills were counted in hands hidden below eye level. The Fox News production staff had transformed the arena into an intense patriotic spectacle. Red, white, and blue banners draped from every conceivable spot, with some sections already sagging because of the humidity the AC units could not handle. Massive television screens stood on either side of the stage like digital sentinels, their black surfaces reflecting the overhead lights in colorful patterns. Up above, hanging between two support beams, a large banner proclaimed, "Promises made, promises kept." A question mark hung unevenly, having been fixed right before the opening using black tape after a legal department employee worried about making absolute assertions. Precisely at 7:00 p.m., the security alert on the side entrance emitted 3 distinct beeps. A Secret Service agent recognizable by his earpiece, the blazer that did not fully hide his weapon, and his constantly moving eyes held the door open. Donald Trump was scheduled to enter exactly 3 minutes later. This particular delay was calculated down to the second on a schedule marked confidential principal timing. It was enough time to build anticipation, but not long enough to seem disrespectful to the Texan audience he considered his loyal base. On the stage, Brett Harrison adjusted his necktie for the 4th time in as many minutes. The makeup artist had warned him about sweating under the studio lights. However, she had not considered the specific kind of sweat caused by realizing your entire career depended on the next 60 minutes occurring without incident. After 12 years anchoring Fox News primetime slots, his gray hair still looked perfectly cut for every show, a small vanity ensured by his weekly $400 barber visits. His producer's commands hissed through his earpiece, reminding him this was supposed to be a friendly appearance with simple questions allowing the guest to shine. At the far side of the discussion desk, placed exactly 6 inches below Trump's chair height, a detail negotiated by his advance team, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett organized her papers with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. 3 pens rested parallel next to her notebook, separated by exactly 1 inch each, while the notebook itself sat flush against the table's edge. Her dark leather portfolio remained closed to her right, its silver clasps reflecting the stage lights like small warning signals. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle on her blazer, a navy blue shade chosen for its professional appearance on camera without clashing against Trump's expected red tie. When she placed her hands flat upon the surface, they showed no trembling. Yet the production manager, watching from offstage, noticed she pressed down slightly as if anchoring herself to the floor beneath the building's concrete base. The crowd had been arriving since 5:30, guided by young volunteers wearing red shirts emblazoned with "Promises Kept" in bold white lettering. The first 3 rows filled up quickly. The political staff had provided a list of approved supporters intended to give appropriate reactions at the right moments. These individuals held signs that were still crisp from the printers, wore MAGA hats with price tags still attached, and chatted with the easy confidence of people used to such gatherings. Further back in the hall, the audience told a different story entirely. The 12th row contained Dorothy and Earl Henderson, married for 53 years as of last Tuesday. Dorothy clutched a white pharmacy bag on her lap, the kind that rustled with medicine bottles whenever moved. The receipt was stapled to the outside, and although the television cameras would not notice it immediately, she had circled several numbers using blue ink, the same pen she had used during 45 years of grading school papers. Her handwriting, visible in close-up shots that would eventually be analyzed second by second, showed the slight tremor associated with arthritis. Yet the figures were clear: $348, $700, $240. Earl sat next to her, his hand covering hers whenever she adjusted the bag. Their wedding bands, thin gold rings worn smooth by time, clicked against each other with every contact. It was a sound they had stopped noticing years ago, much like how Dorothy hummed softly while cooking or Earl cleared his throat before speaking. Tonight, however, that tiny metallic clicking felt loud amidst the quiet sounds before the broadcast started. In the ninth aisle, a group of military veterans had naturally converged, much like soldiers always found their comrades within large crowds. James Wilson maintained an incredibly straight posture, despite the Parkinson's disease that caused his hands to shake at a rate his VA doctor had measured at 4 pulses every second. His American Legion cap rested at the precise angle required by military regulations, distinct from the surrounding red mega hats tilted at whatever angle their owners found fashionable. To his left, Marcus Williams traced the edge of his Purple Heart medal, a subconscious habit he had developed over the 4 decades since a Viet Cong sniper introduced him to the feeling of true pain. Sarah Kim took up most of row 15, even though officially she occupied only a single seat. Her 3 grandchildren, aged 7, 5, and 3, demanded constant attention. The youngest had already spilled his juice box twice, the purple liquid spreading across the concrete floor in a pattern that looked strangely artistic under the overhead lights. She had dressed them in their Sunday best, the same outfits they wore for Korean New Year celebrations and school photos. The middle child, 5-year-old James, named after his grandfather who passed away a year ago, kept swinging his legs, his dress shoes making quiet thumps against the seat. "Grandma," he whispered in that loud way 5-year-olds whisper, "why are we here?" Sarah smoothed his hair, an action she had performed on her own children 30 years ago, their children 5 years ago, and now these children who should have been someone else's responsibility while she visited places her feet had never traveled. "Shh, baby, we listened today." At 7:02 p.m., the entry alert sounded again, once, twice, and on the third signal, the door opened. The audience's atmosphere changed like a wind shifting direction. Those aware of the timing began clapping before Trump even appeared. Others turned to see what was happening, their movements creating a ripple of squeaking chairs and rustling clothes. Donald Trump walked in at 7:03 p.m., precisely according to schedule. His entrance was a lesson in practiced authority. The pace, not too fast, which looks anxious, nor too slow, which appears weak, but that specific cadence suggesting a person with important places to go who was honoring this location with his presence. His shoes, shined to a mirror finish, snapped against the concrete rhythmically, heel-toe, heel-toe, heel-toe. The sound echoed off the convention center's metal roof, creating a resonance that made him sound like a one-man army. He raised both hands in his signature double wave, that strange motion resembling him trying to push aside invisible walls or perhaps conducting an orchestra only he could hear. His face settled into the expression he had practiced in mirrors and television screens for decades, mouth slightly open and a near smile revealing just the lower tips of his teeth. Eyes narrowed as if looking into bright sunlight despite the stage lights not yet reaching him, chin raised at an angle he believed hid what he called his turkey neck during private moments of vanity. The red tie, $295 purchased in bulk, caught the light as he turned left and right, ensuring every section of the audience received the full Trump experience. The tie's knot was what fashion magazines termed a full Windsor, though Trump had modified it over the years into something uniquely his own, bigger, wider, a red silk fist at his throat. The applause from the first 3 rows was immediate and enthusiastic. They stood up in a rehearsed action, some beginning to chant, "Trump, Trump, Trump," in a rhythm matching his walking pace. Row 4 managed scattered applause, the kind born of politeness rather than passion. A few people stood, looked around, and sat back down. Further back, the reaction was harder to define. Not hostile. These were Texans, after all, raised on manners. But something more complex. Rows chapter 10 through 20 produced a sound the audio technicians would later describe as ambient hesitation. Some clapped slowly, their palms meeting without energy, while others remained still, hands clasped over walkers and canes, faces holding the cautious blankness of those who had learned hope could be expensive, and disappointment arrived with accumulated interest. Dorothy Henderson did not clap. Her hands remained wrapped around the pharmacy bag, fingers manipulating the paper in tiny repeating motions. The receipt rustled with every movement, a microscopic sound drowned in the larger noise but captured by the boom microphone swinging overhead. Earl watched as he noticed everything about Dorothy after 53 years and covered her hands with his own, not to stop her but to share in whatever burden she was carrying. Trump reached the stage using the temporary ramp the advance team had insisted upon rather than the steeper permanent stairs that might make a 79-year-old man appear frail. Every step was deliberate. Heel leading, then toe. His free hand gripped the railing, although he tried to make it look casual, as if he were simply grazing it with his fingertips. The cameras positioned at angles his staff had approved filmed him from his preferred side, the one making his profile look more like the image on campaign posters. Brett Harrison stood as Trump approached, offering his hand for the greeting that would establish the evening's hierarchy. Trump grabbed it, pulling Harrison slightly off balance in that way he had, creating dominance through the simple act of saying hello. The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough to claim control, not so long as to appear dependent. "Mr. President," Harrison stated, his voice holding the professional tone network bosses had drilled into him, "welcome to Fort Worth." "Beautiful place," Trump replied, though his eyes were already scanning the crowd, sorting faces into allies, undecideds, and threats. "Beautiful people, the best people, really. Nobody has people like Texas." At the discussion desk, Crockett had not stood. She remained seated, organizing her materials as if the most powerful man in conservative politics had not just entered the room. When Trump's visual sweep reached her, she looked up, locked eyes for precisely 2 seconds, then returned to aligning her notebook with microscopic precision. The gesture was so small that most of the audience missed it. Trump did not. His jaw tightened, muscle causing his jowls to shift in a way the makeup artist had tried to camouflage with shading. He adjusted his tie, patted his hair to check that the complex structure remained intact, then walked to his chair with perhaps slightly more aggression in his step than before. The chair, fine leather embossed with the presidential seal affixed to the back, groaned as he sat in it. A low sound his microphone picked up and amplified momentarily. He began rearranging the items on the table, moving the water glass an inch to the right, shifting the notepad an inch to the left. Every motion suggested a man making himself comfortable. Yet the repetitive nature suggested something else. Body language experts who had analyzed hundreds of politicians recognized the signs. Trump was claiming territory, marking his space. "I'm Brett Harrison," the moderator began, his voice regaining the authoritative tone that had reassured conservative viewers through market crashes and lost elections. "Welcome to this special town hall event, promises made, promises kept." He paused slightly on the question mark, a subtlety that made the phrase sound less like a statement and more like an inquiry. "Tonight we're joined by President Donald Trump to discuss his remarkable economic achievements and the promises he's kept to the American people." The teleprompter text reflected in Harrison's glasses, making his eyes appear robotic. Behind him, the massive screen showed a video montage of Trump signing bills, standing before cheering crowds, the imagery carefully selected to avoid anything negative. No mention of the 2 impeachment proceedings, January 6th, or the numerous investigations. Just Trump triumphant, Trump in charge. The camera operator in position 2, a veteran of 20 years who had filmed everything from hurricanes to Hollywood red carpets, had developed an instinct for finding the real story in crowds. While his fellow operators focused on the red hats and enthusiastic signs in the front rows, he let his lens wander backward, Scanning the faces that were not performing for the cameras, it located row 12, finding Dorothy Henderson, whose fingers continued their anxious work on the pharmacy bag. The receipt was starting to rip along one edge from constant handling. The camera captured the moment she noticed the tear and tried to smooth it back together, her movements gentle, as if comforting the paper itself. It found Sarah Kim trying to reorganize her grandchildren as the youngest became restless. The 3-year-old had discovered that kicking the chair in front of him made a satisfying noise. Sarah's hand intercepted his foot, redirecting his attention to a coloring book she had brought, all while keeping her gaze forward, maintaining the appearance of absorbed attention. It located James Wilson, who was trying to hold his shaking hand still with his other hand. The effort made the trembling worse, traveling up his arms in ripples until he finally let the tremor do what it wanted. The veteran beside him noticed and shifted slightly, using his own body to shield Wilson from potential cameras, an instinctive habit from service. You protected your squad always. We're also joined by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a Democrat from Texas's 30th District. Harrison added, the way he said Democrat, drawing it out slightly, making it sound almost like an admission of guilty behavior. Congresswoman, thank you for providing an alternative perspective tonight. Crockett's nod was efficient. Wasted motion did not exist. Her hands remained perfectly still on the table, spread slightly like someone preparing to play a piano concerto. She had learned long ago as a black woman in politics that stillness was its own form of power, a form of armor, that sometimes the best response to condescension was absolute, unbreakable dignity. Trump had begun his performance before Harrison even finished the introductions. His hands were already moving, conducting that invisible orchestra again. He leaned forward to adjust his microphone unnecessarily. The audio technician had said it was perfect, his suit jacket pulling across his back, exposing the line of what political blogs would identify as a shapewear garment. He sat back, unaware of the reveal, composing his features into what he considered a serious but accessible look. "Thank you, Brett," Trump started, though Harrison had not actually said anything requiring gratitude. "It's great to be back in Texas. We've done incredible things here. Incredible. Nobody's seen economic numbers like we have." His hands began their choreography, pinching thumb and forefinger for precise, sweeping horizontally for incredible, then that accordion gesture when he said biggest, as if physically stretching the words to match his intended meaning. Greatest economy in history before the China virus, and we're building it back even better, much better. In row 18, a man in a faded polo shirt looked down at his phone, his face lit by the screen in the particular pattern of someone checking their bank balance. His expression went through several changes in quick succession. Hope, maybe it's different this time, confusion, that can't be right, resignation, and finally a kind of bitter acceptance. He showed the display to his wife beside him, who looked, sighed, and patted his hand. The gesture expressed everything about shared disappointment and the burden of carrying it together. "Our seniors have done fantastic, more for seniors than any president," Trump continued, perhaps sensing the energy in the room shifting. "Drug prices are way down, Social Security completely protected, Medicare stronger than ever." His right hand swept sideways, dismissing unseen enemies without looking at them. The gesture was like brushing away annoying insects. "These people want to take it all away, but I protected it. Nobody else could have." Henderson's fingers stopped moving on the bag for a moment. She sat very still, as if Trump's words had physically pinned her in place. Then, slowly, like someone testing whether ice will hold their weight, she leaned toward Earl. Her lips moved, the whisper too quiet for the boom mics, but the cameras caught the numbers, 340, 700, 1,200. Earl's response was to take her hand fully, bag and all, and hold it between both of his. The wedding rings caught the light again, creating a brief metallic sparkle. The camera operator in position 2 noticed and held the shot. It was the kind of image that told a whole story without words. 2 hands, 53 years together, holding onto each other against a storm. "Let's take some questions," Harrison began, with the forced seriousness of someone holding a script they knew was purely ceremonial. The plan was simple. 3 pre-selected questions from the front rows, Easy questions designed to let Trump talk about his favorite topics, followed by a challenging question for Crockett meant to put her on the defensive. The producer was shouting in his ear again, "Stick to the format, Brett. Remember the format." Harrison adjusted his tie a fifth time, his palms starting to sweat. Our first question comes from Mark, a small business owner from Arlington. Mark stood up on cue, holding a microphone that had been handed to him seconds before. He was wearing a Trump 2024 hat and a T-shirt that read, "Don't blame me, I voted for Trump." His question was delivered with the stiffness of someone reciting lines they'd memorized just minutes ago. "Mr. President, your tax cuts saved my business. Why do the Democrats want to destroy the economy by raising taxes?" It was perfect, exactly as scripted. Trump smiled, a genuine one this time, the kind that reached his eyes. This was his comfort zone, admiration framed as inquiry. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping an octave into that confidential tone he used when sharing what he claimed were secrets. "Great question, Mark. Fantastic question. The Democrats, they hate success. They hate it. They want to tax you into oblivion, send your jobs to China. I stopped that. I brought the jobs back. Millions and millions of jobs." See? His hands were moving constantly now, weaving a tapestry of success out of thin air. Crockett sat motionless, her eyes fixed on Trump, her expression unreadable. She knew the numbers, knew the tax cuts had overwhelmingly benefited corporations and the wealthy, knew the manufacturing jobs hadn't come back in the numbers he claimed. But she also knew that interrupting now would just play into the narrative of the angry black woman. So she waited, her stillness a counterpoint to Trump's frantic energy. The camera operator in position 3, tasked with keeping Crockett in frame, noticed that she had not blinked in almost a minute. It was unnatural, almost predatory, like a cat waiting by a mouse hole. The second question went just as smoothly. A suburban mother asking about border security allowed Trump to launch into a 5-minute monologue about walls and caravans and invading hordes. The front rows cheered on cue, the "Build the Wall" chant starting up and dying down exactly as rehearsed. Harrison was starting to relax. It was working. The bubble was holding. He checked his watch, 7:28 p.m., right on schedule. "Our final question from the audience," Harrison announced, emphasizing the word "final" slightly too much, "comes from Dorothy Henderson." The name was not on the list. Harrison froze, his eyes darting to the teleprompter, which still showed the name of an approved supporter from row 2. The producer was shouting in his ear, "Now who the hell is Dorothy Henderson? Cut to commercial. No, wait, keep rolling. Don't make it look like panic." In row 12, Dorothy Henderson was struggling to stand. It wasn't easy. The arthritis in her knees flared with the effort, and she had to use the chair in front of her for leverage. The pharmacy bag still clutched in one hand banged against the metal seat with a sharp rattling sound. A microphone runner, a young kid who looked absolutely terrified, was trying to get to her, tripping over feet and walkers in the narrow aisle. Earl was trying to help her up without making it look like she needed help, his hand hovering at her elbow. When she finally stood, she seemed smaller than she had sitting down. She was wearing her Sunday best, a floral dress that had been mended carefully in several places, and a cardigan against the aggressive air conditioning. Her gray hair was pulled back in a sensible bun, and her glasses were thick, magnifying her eyes slightly. She looked exactly like what she was, a retired third-grade teacher from Texas who had worked hard all her life and played by the rules. The microphone finally reached her. It was heavy, and her hand shook slightly as she held it. The entire convention center seemed to hold its breath. Even Trump stopped moving for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he assessed this unexpected interruption. Dorothy cleared her throat. The sound was loud over the speaker system, nervous but determined. "Mr. President," she began, her voice quavering slightly but gaining strength with each word. "You said drug prices are down. You said you fixed it." She paused, taking a breath that sounded ragged in the sudden silence. She lifted the pharmacy bag, holding it up so everyone could see. It was just a cheap plastic bag, but in that moment it felt heavier than anything else in the room. "This is my husband Earl's heart medication. she said, pulling out a standard orange pill bottle. When you took office, it was $80 a month. She held it up higher, her hand shaking more noticeably now. Today I picked up his refill. It's $340. A ripple went through the crowd. $340 a month was not a political talking point. It was a car payment. It was groceries for 2 weeks. Dorothy wasn't finished. She pulled out another bottle, larger this time. This is for my arthritis, she said, her voice tighter now, fighting back emotion. It used to be 50. Today she had to stop, swallow hard. Today it was $700. The number hung in the air, shocking in its ease. $700 a month just to be able to move without excruciating pain. Dorothy reached into the bag one last time and pulled out the receipt, the one with the blue circles on it. It fluttered in her shaking hand. The total today was $1,140, she said, the numbers stark and undeniable. Mr. President, we are retired teachers. We get paid once a month. She looked directly at Trump now, her eyes magnified by her glasses filled with a mixture of anger and desperation that was painful to witness. We have to choose between eating and medicine. We worked our whole lives, paid our taxes, followed the rules. Is this the greatness you promised us? She remained standing, holding the receipt aloft like an accusation. The silence in the convention center was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped wheezing. No one moved. No one cheered. No one booed. The front rows, the approved supporters with their signs and hats, sat frozen, unable to process this intrusion of reality into their carefully constructed world. Trump stared at Dorothy, his mouth slightly open, for once completely at a loss. The teleprompter was blank. His earpiece was silent. There was no script for this, no comeback that would not sound monstrous in the face of such raw, honest pain. Harrison was frantically signaling to the producer, mouthing, "What do I do?" The producer was screaming incoherently, something about cutting the mic, cutting the camera, cutting to anything else. But the camera operator in position 2, the veteran, held the shot. He zoomed in slowly on Dorothy's face, on the tears standing in her magnified eyes, on the trembling hand holding the receipt that proved the lie. It was the longest 31 seconds in television history. Finally, Trump moved. His media training kicked in, the instinct to fill dead air at all costs. He leaned into the microphone, but the confident, secretive tone was gone, replaced by something brittle and defensive. "Well, Dorothy," he began, using her name without permission, trying to establish a false intimacy. "Big Pharma, they're terrible, very nasty people. They've been fighting me like you wouldn't believe." His hands started moving again, but the gestures were jerky, disconnected from his words. "We have plans, beautiful plans, the best plans. In 2 weeks, you're going to see savings, huge savings. Nobody's ever done what I'm doing." It was the standard talk, the same vague promises he'd been making for years, but tonight, against the backdrop of Dorothy's $1,240 receipt, it sounded hollow, almost offensive. 2 weeks, someone yelled from the back of the room. It wasn't a heckler. It sounded like genuine anguish. "You've been saying 2 weeks for 4 years. The bubble had burst. The carefully managed reality Fox News had built was collapsing in real time. Another voice rang out, this one from the veterans section. "What about the VA? I waited 6 months for an appointment, then another. My insulin is $500 a month. I'm rationing it to survive." It was a cascade now, a dam breaking. People were standing up all over the hall, shouting out their own stories of broken promises and financial ruin. Harrison was pounding on his desk, calling for order, but no one was listening. The producer had given up screaming and was now just swearing softly into the open mic. Trump looked panicked. His eyes darted around the room looking for friendly faces, but even the front rows were looking down, uncomfortable and confused. He tried to speak again, to shout over the uproar, but his microphone had been cut in the chaos. That's when Crockett moved. She did not stand up quickly. It was a slow, deliberate rising, unfolding herself from the chair with the same controlled energy she had maintained all night. She picked up her own microphone, which was still live. "Mr. President," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. It wasn't loud, but it had an authority that made people stop and listen. The room quieted down again, the energy shifting focus to the woman standing calmly at the end of the table. "Mr. President," she repeated, looking directly at him, "you just told Mrs. Henderson that you have a plan coming in 2 weeks." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Can you tell us right now one specific detail of that plan? One single thing you are actually going to do to lower her drug prices tomorrow?" Trump glared at her, his face reddening. This was the ambush, the trap he had feared. He sputtered for a moment, his hands flapping uselessly. "We have many things, many options. It's very complex, very complicated. The Democrats block everything. They want you to pay more." It was a non-answer, a dodge, and everyone in the room knew it. Crockett did not let him off the hook. "So you have no plan," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "After 4 years, you have nothing to offer Mrs. Henderson but more empty promises." She turned to the audience then, looking not at the cameras, but at the people in the room. "Mrs. Henderson is not lying," she said, her voice warm now, empathetic. "The veterans here are not lying. The people struggling to afford insulin are not lying. Their pain is real, and they deserve better than to be lied to." The reaction was instantaneous. It started in the back rows, a low murmur of agreement that quickly grew into applause. It wasn't the loud, orchestrated cheering of a rally. It was something deeper, something more authentic. People were nodding, some with tears in their eyes, recognizing their own struggles in Crockett's words. Even some people in the front rows, the ones wearing MAGA hats, were clapping slowly, reluctantly, caught between their loyalty and the undeniable truth of what they had just witnessed. Trump couldn't take it. The applause for Crockett, the open defiance, the collapse of his carefully constructed image, it was too much. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the stage floor. "This is a setup," he shouted, his voice cracking without the microphone. "Fake news, paid agitators, you're all plants." He was yelling at the audience now, at the very people he had claimed to love just minutes ago. The mask had slipped completely, revealing the raw, ugly rage underneath. He started moving towards the stairs, not the ones he had come up, but the emergency exit at the side of the stage. He wanted out, wanted to escape the reality that had invaded his safe space. His Secret Service agents scrambled to keep up, caught off guard by his sudden departure. Trump was moving fast, faster than he had walked in, his head down, his shoulders hunched angrily. He did not see Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen was 77 years old, a retired nurse who lived in Fort Worth with her daughter's family. She used a portable oxygen concentrator, a small machine on wheels that followed her around via a plastic tube connected to her nose. She had been sitting in an aisle seat near the front, and when the chaos started, she had gotten up to leave, frightened by the shouting. The wheels of her oxygen machine had gotten caught on the leg of a chair, and she was bent over trying to free them, completely unaware of the angry former president bearing down on her. Trump collided with her at full speed. He didn't even try to stop or swerve. His shoulder hit her frail body with sickening force, spinning her around. Her feet got tangled in the oxygen tubing and she went down hard, hitting the concrete floor with a dull thud that was audible even over the noise of the crowd. Her glasses flew off, skittering across the floor. The oxygen cannula ripped out of her nose, leaving red marks on her face. She lay there stunned, gasping for air, a small crumpled figure on the cold gray concrete. The entire room gasped as one. It was a sound of pure horror. The cameras, still rolling, caught it all. The collision, the fall, the frail woman lying helpless on the floor. But what happened next was even more shocking. Trump did not stop. He did not look down. He did not offer a hand. He did not even break stride. He just kept walking, stepping over the oxygen tubing, past the fallen woman, and out the emergency exit, followed closely by his security detail. The door slammed shut behind them with a final, echoing boom. For a moment, there was dead silence in the convention center, a silence deeper and more profound than the one that had followed Dorothy Henderson's question. It was the silence of collective shock, of disbelief that what they had just seen could actually be real. Then chaos erupted. People were rushing towards Mrs. Chen, calling for a medic, trying to help. Crockett was the first one off the stage, running in her heels, dropping to her knees beside the fallen woman. "Don't move, Mrs. Chen. Stay still," she said, taking the woman's hand, her voice calm and reassuring in the midst of the pandemonium. "Help is on the way." The Fox News feed cut to black then, finally, but it was too late. The image had already been beamed into millions of homes, burned into the retina of the nation. A former president knocking down an elderly grandmother and walking away without a backward glance. It was 7:42 p.m. The town hall was over, but the real story was just beginning. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By the time Trump's motorcade reached the airport, the video clip was the #1 trend globally on every social media platform. Trump knocks down. Grandma was the hashtag, and it was spreading like wildfire. The footage was devastating, 31 seconds that encapsulated everything his critics had ever said about him. The narcissism, the lack of empathy, the cowardice. But it wasn't just critics sharing it, it was everyone. People who had voted for him, people who had defended him, people who had tried to ignore his worst excesses. They all watched the video and something inside them broke. It was one thing to insult politicians or journalists. It was another thing entirely to physically assault a 77-year-old woman on oxygen and leave her lying on the floor. The image of Mrs. Chen, frail and helpless, contrasted with Trump's retreating back, became instantly iconic, a visual shorthand for a presidency defined by callousness. The statements started pouring in within the hour. Veterans groups, usually careful to remain nonpartisan, issued blistering condemnations. "Tonight we saw the true character of Donald Trump," read a statement from the VFW. "A man who would knock down an elderly woman and flee the scene is not fit to lead anything, let alone the armed forces of the United States." Religious leaders, many of whom had been staunch Trump supporters, expressed their horror. "There is no Christian justification for what we witnessed tonight," tweeted a prominent evangelical pastor. "To abandon the vulnerable is to abandon Christ himself." Even some Republican politicians, seeing which way the wind was blowing, began to distance themselves. Senators who had spent years excusing his behavior suddenly found their moral compasses, issuing statements about unacceptable conduct and the need for basic human decency. But the most damaging response came not from the powerful, but from the powerless. Ordinary people started sharing their own stories, inspired by Dorothy Henderson and Mrs. Chen. The hashtag had knocked down but not out started trending alongside the video. People posted photos of their exorbitant pharmacy receipts, their denied insurance claims, their struggles to care for aging parents or sick children in a system that seemed designed to crush them. A nurse in Ohio posted a picture of herself crying in her car after a 12-hour shift, unable to save a patient who had rationed their insulin because they couldn't afford a refill. A small business owner in Michigan shared the foreclosure notice on his shop, lost because he couldn't keep up with rising healthcare costs for his employees. A teacher in Florida posted a photo of her classroom where she kept a stash of snacks for students who came to school hungry because their parents had to choose between food and rent. It was a tidal wave of shared pain and frustration, a collective cry of enough. The town hall, meant to be a coronation, had become a catalyst for a national reckoning, and at the center of it all was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She had not yelled, she had not grandstanded, she had not played political games, she had simply listened, and then she had acted, with compassion and moral clarity. The image of her kneeling beside Mrs. Chen, holding her hand while the powerful men fled the scene, became as iconic as the assault itself. It was a contrast that no amount of spin could erase. The bully versus the healer, the coward versus the leader. In the days and weeks that followed, Crockett became the de facto leader of a new movement, one focused not on partisan politics but on the basic needs of ordinary Americans. She used her newfound platform to push for real solutions, legislation to lower drug prices, to expand access to health care, to support caregivers and protect Social Security. She worked across the aisle, building coalitions with Republicans who were tired of the case and wanted to actually get things done. It wasn't easy. The opposition was fierce, the lobbying intense, but something had shifted in the country. The sight of Mrs. Chen on that concrete floor had awakened something in the American psyche, a sense of shared decency that had been dormant for too long. People were no longer willing to accept empty promises and scapegoating. They demanded action, and they were watching. 6 months after that disastrous night in Fort Worth, President Biden signed into law the Dorothy Henderson and Mrs. Chen Affordable Health Care Act. It was the most significant expansion of healthcare access and drug price controls in a generation. At the signing ceremony in the Rose Garden, Dorothy Henderson and Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, recognized as the accidental heroines who had made it all possible. Mrs. Chen recovered from her fall, though still using her oxygen, wore a new pair of glasses and a smile that lit up her face. Dorothy held Earl's hand. Her pharmacy bag sat on her lap, but today it held only a water bottle and her purse. They could afford their meds now easily. President Biden spoke about the power of ordinary people to change the world, about the importance of listening to those who are struggling, about the fundamental American promise that no one should be left behind. Then he handed the first pen to Jasmine Crockett. She took it, her eyes shining, and looked out at the crowd, at Dorothy and Earl, at Mrs. Chen, at the veterans and teachers and nurses who had found their voices and demanded to be heard. She thought back to that hot, tense night in Fort Worth, to the squeaking chairs and the smell of hairspray and anxiety, to the moment when a simple question about drug prices had shattered a carefully constructed lie. She thought about the 31 seconds of silence, the 800 people stunned into stillness, the sudden, terrifying clarity of truth. "This isn't about me," she had said to the reporters afterwards, and she meant it. It was about the people who had stood up when it would have been easier to stay seated, who had spoken out when they were terrified, who had refused to be silenced or ignored. It was about the grandmothers who had brought a president to his knees, not with violence, but with the simple, undeniable power of their own lived reality. And as she stood there in the Rose Garden, watching history being made, Jasmine Crockett knew one thing for certain: the American people were awake now, and they would never go back to sleep.